The silk of the veil was a ghost's touch against my skin, a flimsy barrier between me and the rest of my life. From behind the lattice of the screen where I waited, I could see him standing at the altar, a statue carved from shadows and steel. Kwon Ji-young, my husband. The name was a bitter taste in my mouth, a foreign word for a future I never chose. He was handsome, devastatingly so, in a way that felt like a threat. His black tuxedo was tailored to perfection, sharp lines and stark angles that mirrored the man himself. His profile was severe, a masterpiece of cold indifference, from the sharp line of his jaw to the dark, unreadable eyes that swept over the assembled guests with an air of absolute authority. Our marriage was a contract, a merger of his Korean syndicate with the remnants of my father's fallen empire, and I was the price. A 25-year-old woman, bound and sold to seal a deal written in blood and betrayal. The air in the waiting room was thick with the scent of lilies, funereal and cloying. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a gilded cage. Then, through the heavy oak door, I heard his voice, low and resonant, cutting through the murmurs of the unseen crowd. He was speaking to his right-hand man, the ever-present Mr. Park, whose stoic silhouette was a permanent fixture at Ji-young's side. "Is it done?" Ji-young's voice was stripped of all warmth, a blade of ice. "She is waiting, sir," Mr. Park replied, his tone deferential, clipped. A silence stretched, taut and suffocating. I leaned closer to the door, my breath held captive in my lungs. And then came the words that shattered the last fragile piece of me. "I don't want her." "I never did," Ji-young stated, not with anger or frustration, but with a flat, final coldness that was so much worse. "She is a means to an end. A beautiful, inconvenient necessity. Make sure she understands her place. She is a Kwon by name, but she is nothing to me." The world tilted, the scent of lilies becoming nauseating. He didn't just see me as a pawn. He saw me as a burden he was forced to carry. The humiliation was a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs and leaving a hollow ache where my pride used to be. My father's duty, my family's honor, it all dissolved into this single, brutal rejection. The door swung open. Mr. Park stood there, his face an impassive mask. He bowed slightly. "It is time, Mrs. Kwon, Mrs. Kwon." The name was a brand, searing my skin. I rose, the heavy satin of my bridal gown whispering around my ankles. My hands, cold as marble, clutched the bouquet of white roses so tightly their thorns pricked my skin. As I walked towards him, towards the man who owned my future and despised my existence, a cold resolve settled deep within my bones. He may have bought me, but he would never own me. I would be his salvation or his ruin, but I would not be nothing. Our home was a penthouse overlooking a city of sprawling lights, a jewel box in the sky that felt more like a mausoleum. The days following the wedding bled into one another, each one a carbon copy of the last, marked by a silence so profound it was a living entity. Kwon Ji-young moved through the vast, sterile rooms like a ghost, his presence a constant, oppressive weight. He was a creature of routine and control. He left before I woke, his scent, sandalwood and something sharp, like winter air, the only evidence he had slept in the bed we were forced to share. He returned late, his face etched with the day's battles, his eyes sweeping past me as if I were another piece of the minimalist, brutally expensive furniture. He had never laid a hand on me, never offered more than a clipped command to the staff regarding my needs. His declaration that I was nothing to him was not a threat. It was a promise he kept with chilling precision. My only solace was Nia, my best friend, my sister in all but blood. Our calls were my lifeline. Snatched in the brief hours I knew Ji-young was buried in meetings at his downtown headquarters. "You can't let him break you, Imani," she hissed down the line, her voice a warm fire in the Arctic chill of my life. "Remember who you are. Your father raised a queen, not a porcelain doll to be kept on a shelf." I would stare out at the glittering cityscape, the lights like a galaxy of cold, distant stars. "It's hard, Nia. The way he looks through me, it's like I'm not even here, The penthouse was a fortress of glass and marble, a testament to his power. Every surface was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting a distorted version of myself, a woman in silk pajamas with haunted eyes, wandering a cage she couldn't escape. Ji-young's control was absolute. He never raised his voice, never had to. His power was in his stillness, in the unnerving calm with which he orchestrated his violent world. One evening, I found him in his study, a room I was implicitly forbidden from entering. He was standing before a floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He hadn't heard me approach. For a fleeting moment, the mask slipped. The cold leader was gone, replaced by a man burdened by something ancient and heavy. His shoulders were slumped, and the reflection in the glass showed a flicker of profound vulnerability, a deep-seated fear in his dark eyes. The moment I made a sound, a tiny, involuntary gasp, the mask slammed back into place. He turned, his body rigid, his eyes becoming opaque stones. "You should not be in here," he said, his voice dangerously soft. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an eviction. I fled, my heart pounding not with fear, but with a confusing, unwelcome flicker of something else. I had seen behind the curtain just for a second, and the man I saw was not a monster. He was a man in torment, and that was infinitely more dangerous. The first crack in our sterile existence came not as a tremor, but as a violent earthquake. I was arranging flowers in the living area, a futile attempt to breathe some life into the soulless space, when the concussive force of an explosion rocked the entire building. The floor-to-ceiling windows shuddered violently, a web of cracks instantly fracturing the panoramic view of the city. Glass rained down onto the marble floor like deadly diamonds. My scream was swallowed by the blare of a dozen alarms. Before I could even process what had happened, he was there. Ji-young moved with a lethal grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. One moment, he was a ghost in the periphery. The next, he was a solid wall in front of me, shielding my body with his own. He shoved me to the ground behind a thick marble column, his arm a band of steel around my shoulders. "Stay down," he roared, the command ripping through the chaos. His voice was different. Not the cold, detached tone I was used to, but a raw, guttural sound filled with a fury so potent it was palpable. Mr. Park and two other guards materialized, guns drawn, their movements economical and precise as they secured the room. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and the metallic tang of fear. My ears rang. From my position on the floor, I watched Ji-young. He was no longer the impassive businessman. He was a warlord in his element. He issued a rapid-fire series of orders in Korean, his eyes scanning every shadow, every corner, for a threat. He was magnificent and terrifying. When the immediate danger seemed to have passed, he turned back to me. His eyes, usually so cold, were blazing with a fierce, protective light. He crouched, his hand coming to my face, his thumb brushing away a shard of glass I hadn't even realized was on my cheek. His touch was electric, a searing heat that shot through the ice that had encased my heart. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and strained. I shook my head, unable to find my voice. His gaze lingered on my face for a heartbeat too long, a complex storm of emotions swirling in their depths, anger, concern, and something else, something I couldn't dare to name. It was the first time he had truly looked at me, the first time he had touched me with anything other than cold necessity. The explosion had been a message from the Cheon clan, his primary rivals, a brazen act of war. It had shattered the windows of our gilded cage, but it had also shattered the impenetrable wall between us, leaving us in the rubble of our silent, separate lives, forced to face the wreckage together. The aftermath felt more dangerous than the attack itself. The penthouse was no longer a safe haven. It was a compromised fortress, a constant reminder of our vulnerability. For my own protection, Ji-young decreed I was not to leave his side. Not for a moment. This edict transformed our Cold War into a suffocating, unwilling intimacy. I was moved from my separate bedroom into his, my things placed awkwardly beside his own stark, masculine possessions. We were shadows of one another, bound together in every waking moment and thrust into a shared silence during the long, sleepless nights. The tension was a physical presence, a third person in the room, coiling in the space between us on the massive bed. He would lie rigidly on his side, his back a formidable wall of muscle, while I lay staring at the ceiling, acutely aware of every breath he took. One night, a security alert, a false alarm, sent the entire residence into lockdown. Emergency shutters slammed down over the broken windows, plunging the sprawling suite into absolute darkness and claustrophobic silence. We were trapped in his bedroom, the air suddenly thick and hard to breathe. I felt a surge of panic, the walls feeling as if they were closing in. A small, choked sound escaped my lips. I can't breathe," I whispered into the oppressive dark. I felt the bed shift. His voice, when it came, was startlingly close, stripped of its usual icy control. "It's all right, Imani. Just the shutters," he said my name. My actual name. Not she, or a dismissive gesture. Imani. The sound of it on his lips was both a shock and a strange comfort. A faint green light from a security panel cast his features in an ethereal glow as he sat up. "My father used to lock me in a cellar when I disappointed him," I confessed, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. A secret I had never told anyone but Nia. "He said it would build character. It just taught me to hate the dark." Jiyoung was silent for a long moment. I expected a curt dismissal, a return to his cold indifference. Instead, he reached out, his hand finding mine in the darkness. His fingers were warm, his grip firm and steadying. "He was a fool," Jiyoung said, his voice a low rumble. "Fear does not build character. It only builds cages." We sat like that for what felt like an eternity, his hand holding mine, the only anchor in the suffocating blackness. It was a fragile truce, a temporary ceasefire in a war I didn't understand. But in that moment, I realized his own cage was far more elaborate than mine. His coldness wasn't a weapon meant to wound me, it was a shield to protect himself. This revelation was terrifying because it chipped away at the hatred I had carefully cultivated, leaving behind a confusing, treacherous landscape of burgeoning empathy for the man I was supposed to despise. The Cheon clan grew bolder. Their attacks escalated from warnings to targeted assaults. A car bomb meant for Jiyoung's convoy instead caught a decoy vehicle, a stark message that they had an inside source, someone who knew his movements. Paranoia became a poison seeping into the foundations of the Kwan Empire. The traitor could be anyone. This internal threat forced Jiyoung's hand, pushing him to the edge. The breaking point came on a cold, rain-slicked night. We were returning from a supposedly secure location when our vehicle was ambushed. It was a brutal, chaotic symphony of screeching tires, shattering glass, and the deafening roar of automatic gunfire. Mr. Park, driving with grim focus, swerved into a darkened alley, the car slamming to a halt. "They knew," he gritted out, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Jiyoung was already moving, pulling me from the car, his body a shield. "We go on foot." To the safe house, he pressed a cold, heavy pistol into my hand. "Do you know how to use this?" I nodded, my father's lessons from a lifetime ago surging to the forefront of my mind. The rain plastered my hair to my face as we ran, the sounds of our pursuers echoing in the narrow alley. A figure emerged from the shadows ahead, blocking our path. It wasn't one of the Cheon thugs. It was Jiyoung's own cousin, Minjun, a man who had smiled at our wedding, his eyes filled with a duplicity I now recognized. The treacherous insider. "The Cheon family sends their regards, cousin," Minjun sneered, raising his weapon. Everything happened in a blur. Jiyoung pushed me behind him, a guttural roar of betrayal tearing from his throat. Gunshots exploded in the confined space. I saw Jiyoung stumble, a dark stain blossoming on his white shirt. Minjun crumpled to the ground, a look of shock on his face as Mr. Park appeared behind him, his own weapon smoking. But another shot rang out, and a searing pain tore through my shoulder. I collapsed against the wet brick wall, the world tilting. Jiyoung was at my side in an instant, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He ripped a piece of his shirt, pressing it hard against my wound. "No, no, no," he chanted, his voice breaking. The cold facade was utterly gone, incinerated by fear. He looked at me, his dark eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and the truth, the great mystery of him, finally spilled out. "I never wanted you in this world, Imani," he confessed, his voice ragged with anguish. "I was cold to make you hate me, to keep you at a distance. I thought if they saw you were nothing to me, they would leave you alone. I thought I could protect you by pretending not to care." His words recontextualized everything. Every cold glance, every dismissive word, every night spent on the far side of the bed. It hadn't been rejection. It had been a desperate, flawed, and heartbreaking attempt to keep me safe. It was a shield, not for him, but for me. "You idiot," I whispered, a tear tracing a path through the grime on my cheek. A complete and utter idiot. He pulled me closer, his hand cradling the back of my head, his forehead resting against mine. The rain fell around us, washing the blood from the pavement. "I know," he breathed, his voice thick with a pain that had nothing to do with his own injury. "But you are my salvation, Imani. You were from the moment I first saw you. In the heart of the storm, surrounded by enemies and betrayal, the walls didn't just crack, they crumbled into dust, and for the first time, we were no longer two separate people bound by a contract, but two souls fighting for survival, finally on the same side." The safe house was the antithesis of the penthouse. It was a brutalist concrete bunker hidden beneath an unremarkable warehouse, furnished with only the barest of necessities: a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a well-stocked medical kit. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and antiseptic. Here, stripped of the trappings of his empire, Kwon Jeong seemed both more and less human. The legend was gone, leaving only the man, bleeding and breathing and entirely focused on me. He gently pushed me down to sit on the edge of the bed, his movements careful, almost reverent. The terror I had seen in his eyes in the alley had now subsided into a grim, focused intensity. He worked with a practiced efficiency, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he cut away the blood-soaked fabric of my dress from my shoulder. I flinched as he cleaned the wound, the antiseptic stinging like 1,000 tiny needles. "I am sorry," he murmured, his voice rough. "I am so sorry, Imani." His apology was for more than the physical pain. It was for the months of coldness, for the lie he had forced us both to live. I watched him, his handsome face etched with lines of pain and regret. His own injury, a nasty gash high on his ribs, was still bleeding sluggishly, staining the pristine white of his ruined shirt. "You're hurt too," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He waved it away. "It is nothing," but it wasn't nothing. When he finished bandaging my shoulder, I pushed his hands away and gestured for him to sit. He hesitated, a flicker of his old, authoritative self returning, but the exhaustion in his eyes won out. He sat and I took the medical kit. My fingers trembled slightly as I cleaned his wound, my touch tracing the hard planes of his torso. He was built like a predator, all lean muscle and coiled strength, but beneath my hands, he flinched, a stark reminder of his mortality. Our proximity was dizzying. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, smell the scent of rain and blood, and the unique, masculine fragrance that was entirely his. "Why?" I asked, my voice low as I worked. "Why go to such lengths? You could have just told me." He looked away, his jaw tight. "To tell you would have been to involve you, to make you a target. The Cheons, my other rivals, they are animals. They would have seen you as a weakness, a lever to use against me. I thought if they believed you were just a decoration, a political bride I didn't care for, you would be invisible. Safe." His logic was twisted, born from a world of violence and paranoia I could barely comprehend. It was a cruel kindness, a painful protection. "You underestimated me," I said softly, meeting his gaze. "You thought I was a fragile doll to be hidden away. You never thought that I could be a queen who could stand beside you." His eyes searched mine, and for the first time, I saw the full, devastating depth of his regret. He had been so focused on protecting the pawn, he had never considered she could be a player. We existed in a strange limbo in that concrete box, the world outside held at bay. The threat was still there, a hungry wolf circling our sanctuary, but within these four walls, a new, fragile world was being built. The silence between us was no longer a weapon but a space for contemplation. We ate pre-packaged rations, drank bottled water, and talked. He told me about his father, a man who ruled with fear and saw love as a liability. He spoke of the weight of the Kwan name, a legacy of blood and power he had inherited at an age when other men were just discovering who they were. He never made excuses for his actions, but he laid the pieces of his life out before me, and I began to understand the man who had been forged in that crucible of violence and expectation. In turn, I told him about my own father, a man whose love was a cage of a different sort, one built of duty and obligation. I spoke of my dreams of being an architect, dreams I had packed away when I became a bargaining chip. He listened, his dark eyes never leaving my face, absorbing my words as if they were a lifeline. I saw him, truly saw him, for the first time. The ruthless leader was a mask, a necessary armor. The man beneath it was guarded and wounded, but possessed a capacity for a fierce, desperate loyalty that was both terrifying and utterly captivating. One evening, after I had changed the dressing on his side, my hand lingered on his bare skin. The air crackled, the space between us shrinking until it was non-existent. He turned his head slowly, his gaze dropping to my lips. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild and frantic rhythm. The cold, untouchable man who had haunted my days was gone, replaced by this man whose vulnerability was an irresistible invitation. "Imani," he breathed, his voice a raw whisper, and it was all the permission I needed. I leaned in, and he met me halfway. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision, a desperate, hungry claiming. It was months of frustration, of fear, of unspoken longing unleashed in a single, searing moment. His hand came up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us at all. It was a kiss of confession and absolution, a promise of a future I had never dared to imagine. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. The mystery of him was solved, but a new, more thrilling one had just begun. The mystery of us. In the dim light of the safe house, I looked at the Korean Mafia boss I had been forced to marry, the man who had declared he never wanted me, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I was falling in love with him. The kiss changed everything. The last vestiges of our old dynamic, prisoner and jailer, pawn and king, were burned away, leaving behind a raw, electrifying connection. We were no longer just two people hiding from a common enemy. We were partners, equals. The realization dawned on Ji-young slowly, then all at once. The following morning, as Mr. Park delivered a status report via a heavily encrypted satellite phone, Ji-young pulled me over to the table where he had spread out a map of the city's underworld territories. "The Cheon clan has a mole in the Port Authority. That's how they knew which of my shipments to hit," he explained, his finger tracing a route along the docks. "We have been looking for a high-level official. Someone with access to schedules." He looked at me, a question in his eyes. He was including me. I studied the map, my mind, once focused on escape, now turning to strategy. "You're thinking like a king, Ji-young," I said, my voice steady. "You're looking for a knight or a rook. But betrayal doesn't always come from the top. Sometimes it's a pawn." I thought back to the scant information I'd gathered from overheard whispers and society gossip in my early days at the penthouse. There was a woman, the wife of a junior logistics manager at the port. I remember hearing she had a sudden, very public gambling problem. Debts that appeared out of nowhere and were just as quickly settled. No one would look twice at her husband. "He's too low-level." Ji-young stared at me, a slow, dawning respect in his eyes. He had been looking for a powerful man, a corrupt official. He had never considered a desperate man, one being controlled through his wife's debts. It was a vulnerability, he would have completely overlooked. He picked up the satellite phone and gave Mr. Park a new name to investigate. Find out everything about him. And his wife. When he hung up, he turned to me, his expression serious. You see things I do not. You see the human element, the quiet desperation I have been trained to ignore. He reached out, his hand gently touching my cheek. My father taught me to see everyone as a piece on a chessboard. You see the person. It was in that moment that our bond solidified into something more than passion. It was forged in the fire of mutual respect. I was not just the woman he wanted to protect. I was an asset, a strategist, his queen. And as we stood there, our minds united against the threat outside, I felt a surge of power that had nothing to do with his name or his empire. It was my own. I was no longer a victim of circumstance. I was an active architect of our survival, and for the first time since my father's death, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Our time in the safe house became a crucible. We were no longer hiding, we were planning. The Spartan room transformed into a war room, the single table covered in maps, timelines, and connection charts I sketched out on the back of old shipping manifests. We worked side by side, a seamless unit fueled by black coffee and a burning desire for retribution. The information on the junior logistics manager and his wife proved to be the key that unlocked the entire conspiracy. The Cheon clan had been using small, seemingly insignificant people, leveraging their debts and fears to create a network of whispers that fed them critical information. It was brilliant in its subtlety, a strategy Jeong's more overt, power-focused tactics had failed to anticipate. They're using the people we overlook, I explained, pointing to a name on the chart. The drivers, the cleaners, the administrative assistants. The people who are invisible. That's our way in. We used their own strategy against them. The plan we devised was audacious. It wasn't a frontal assault, but a quiet, insidious infiltration. Instead of striking at the head of the Cheon clan, we would dismantle his empire from the inside out, using his own network of informants against him by feeding them false information. Jeong trusted my instincts completely. He listened as I outlined the psychological aspect of the plan, how to create paranoia and distrust within the Cheon ranks, making them tear each other apart before we even fired a shot. The night we left the safe house, there was a new energy between us. The air was charged not with fear, but with purpose. He helped me into a simple, dark outfit, his hands lingering on my waist. "Ready, my queen?" he murmured against my ear, his voice a low vibration that sent a shiver down my spine. "I was born ready," I replied, turning to face him. I saw myself reflected in his dark, intense eyes, not the frightened bride in a white dress, but a woman of strength and resolve. He was my king, and I his partner. Our first move was to a discreet apartment in a part of the city he didn't control. From there, through Mr. Park, we began to sow the seeds of chaos. A false shipping route was leaked. A rumor about a fabricated internal coup was started. We watched from the shadows as the Cheon clan began to devour itself, just as I had predicted. The fighting was not with guns and bombs, but with whispers and lies, a far more elegant and devastating form of warfare. Jeong had always ruled with an iron fist. I was teaching him how to rule with a razor-sharp mind. Together, we were not just surviving, we were ascendant. The final confrontation was not in a hail of gunfire, but in the sterile, glass-walled office of Chairman Cheon himself. We walked into his headquarters not as invaders, but as invited guests. The false information we had leaked had led him to believe that Jeong was weakened, his organization in tatters, and that he was coming to surrender. The arrogance of the man was his undoing. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, a smug smile on his face, flanked by his two most trusted lieutenants. He barely gave me a glance, dismissing me as the pretty, useless wife. It was his final mistake. "Jeong," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "I am glad you have finally seen reason." Jeong stood calmly before the desk, his hands in his pockets. He didn't look like a man surrendering. He looked like a predator that had cornered his prey. "The reason I see, Chairman, is that you are a fool," Jeong stated, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. You built an empire on the backs of broken people, and you never imagined they could be turned against you. On cue, the doors to the office opened. Mr. Park entered, but he was not alone. Behind him stood Chairman Cheon's two lieutenants, their faces pale, their guns now pointed not at us, but at their own boss. We had spent weeks turning them, using their own secrets and debts, the very tools the chairman had used to control them, to buy their loyalty. The smug smile vanished from Chairman Cheon's face, replaced by a look of utter disbelief and betrayal. "You," he choked out, staring at his men. I stepped forward, and for the first time, the chairman's eyes focused on me. "He didn't do it alone," I said, my voice clear and cold. "You overlooked me. You saw a decoration. You should have seen a queen. The fight was over." The Cheon clan crumbled that day, not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating implosion of its own corrupted foundation. As we walked out of that building, leaving the ruin of a rival empire behind us, Jeong's hand found mine. It wasn't the tentative, questioning touch from the safe house. It was a firm, possessive grip, a silent declaration to the world. We had faced the storm and emerged not just intact, but forged into a single, unbreakable entity. Our new beginning was not a return to the sterile penthouse. Jeong had it sold, stripped of every memory of our cold, silent beginning. He took me to a sprawling, traditional Korean house nestled in the quiet hills outside the city, a place of serene gardens and warm wood, of life and tranquility. Standing on the veranda, looking out at the peaceful landscape, he turned to me. The setting sun cast his handsome features in a soft, golden light, and the cold, ruthless Mafia boss was nowhere to be seen. In his place was my husband, my partner, my salvation. "This is our home now, Imani," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He took both of my hands in his. "My life was a fortress of solitude and duty before you. You walked into it and leveled the walls." He brought my hand to his lips, his gaze holding mine. "You are not a Kwan by name. You are Kwan Imani. My wife, my heart, my queen, my everything." I leaned into him, my head resting against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The journey had been one of terror and pain, of misunderstanding and betrayal. But it had led me here, to this man, to this moment of profound, hard-won peace. The contract that had once bound me as a prisoner now bound me in a love more powerful than any empire, a love forged in fire and shadow, destined to endure any darkness that was yet to come.